In the distant future, humanity had become more than just a species of Earth. After centuries of progress and exploration, mankind had spread to distant stars, built colossal cities in orbit, and constructed the most powerful warships known across the universe. But with this vast reach came inevitable conflict, and the galaxy was no stranger to war. The Terran Alliance, a coalition of human colonies, was at the forefront of a galaxy-spanning conflict with the ruthless Anroth Dominion, an alien empire bent on controlling every star system in its path. Captain Alicia Holt of the Terran battlecruiser Starfall stood at the helm of humanity's hope, watching the flickering stars through the vast windows of her flagship. The war was not going well. The Anroth had proven to be a relentless enemy, their warships unmatched in power, and their ability to destroy entire worlds with ease was a terrifying reality. The Alliance was on the verge of collapse, and the Terran forces, once mighty and invincible, were being pushed to the brink of extinction. But the Starfall was different. Unlike the massive dreadnoughts that fought for dominance in the war, the Starfall was the newest and most advanced vessel in the Alliance fleet. It was capable of faster-than-light travel, equipped with weapons powerful enough to challenge the Anroth at their own game. However, it had one last secret weapon, something even its creators did not fully understand: the beacon. The beacon was an ancient alien artifact, discovered in the uncharted depths of a forgotten galaxy. It had been left behind by an extinct civilization known as the Elders. No one knew what it did, only that its energy signature was unlike anything ever seen by the human race. Now, with the Terran forces facing annihilation, the beacon was humanity's final hope, a possible key to winning the war. As Holt paced across the command deck, her mind raced with the implications of the mission ahead. She had been chosen to lead a daring and dangerous mission, to journey to the farthest reaches of the galaxy to find the ancient ruins that could reveal the true power of the beacon. It was a mission no one else had volunteered for, and one fraught with uncertainty. But if successful, it could tip the scales of the war forever. Failure, however, would mean the end of human civilization. The ship's AI, known only as Rail, brought her back to the present. "Captain Holt," Rail's voice echoed in her mind, "the Starfall is ready for departure. Our trajectory to the first coordinates has been plotted. We can leave at your command." Holt took a deep breath. Her crew trusted her. The men and women aboard the Starfall had faced countless battles together, and their bond was unbreakable. Yet, the reality of the mission weighed heavily on her heart. She had lost friends and comrades to the Anroth, and she could feel the pressure mounting with each passing second. "Set a course, Rail," Holt said, her voice calm yet resolute. "It's time to find out what the beacon can do." The Starfall leapt into faster-than-light travel, its engines roaring to life as the stars blurred into streaks of light. As the ship shot forward, the crew braced themselves for the unknown. The journey to the beacon's coordinates would take them across dangerous star systems, through hostile territories, and into the heart of Anroth space. The risk was enormous, but the potential reward was even greater. The first leg of their journey was relatively quiet. The Starfall cruised through uncharted regions of space, avoiding the larger Anroth patrols. Holt spent her time reviewing the intelligence gathered by the Alliance, trying to piece together what little they knew about the mysterious Elders and their technology. Every scrap of data she could find seemed to hint at the same thing. The Elders had once been powerful beyond measure, and their technology was said to be capable of reshaping entire galaxies. If the beacon truly held the key to unlocking their secrets, then the war might be won before it even began. As they neared the coordinates, however, something strange began to happen. The stars around them seemed to flicker, and a sudden wave of static washed over the ship's systems. Rail, normally a calming presence, crackled with interference. "Captain," Rail said urgently, "we are no longer alone. Something is intercepting our communications." Holt's eyes narrowed. The crew stood silent, awaiting her orders. "Prepare for a possible ambush," she commanded. "Set all weapons to standby and keep shields at maximum strength." "Rail, can you pinpoint the source of the interference?" "Unknown, Captain," Rail replied. "But it is coming from the planet ahead. It's as if the planet itself is broadcasting." A sense of dread settled over the crew. They were approaching the coordinates, but something was wrong. The beacon's location was supposed to be uninhabited. What could be causing this strange interference? Holt looked out the window, staring at the glowing orb of a distant planet looming on the horizon. She knew that whatever lay ahead would change the course of history, whether for good or ill. And with the Anroth closing in from all sides, time was quickly running out. "Brace for impact," she said, her voice steady despite the mounting tension. "Prepare for whatever comes next." The starfall drifted closer to the mysterious planet, its hull vibrating gently as the ship cut through the silence of deep space. The flickering lights from distant stars became a hazy blur, drowned out by the ominous presence of the unknown world ahead. The interference in the ship's systems was growing stronger with every passing second, making it nearly impossible for Rail to maintain a clear scan of the planet's surface. "Captain, the interference is intensifying," Rail warned, his normally calm voice tinged with urgency. "I am unable to get a proper reading on the planet's atmosphere, its terrain, or any signs of civilization. It's as if someone, or something, is deliberately masking all data." Holt's jaw tightened. She had read the reports, studied the cryptic clues, and yet she never expected this level of disruption. The beacon's coordinates had led them to this forsaken world, but the way the planet seemed to reach out and disrupt their ship's system sent a wave of unease through her. She turned to her crew, her gaze sharp. "Prepare for a landing. Keep all systems on high alert. This is no ordinary planet." "Captain, if the beacon is truly here," Commander Jalen Keary's, her first officer, interjected, his voice steady, "we need to tread carefully. There could be traps. The Elders were powerful, but we have no idea what kind of defenses they might have left behind." "We don't have a choice," Holt replied, her mind already racing ahead. "The Anroth will be on us soon. This is humanity's last chance. We can't turn back now." With a final nod to Keary's, she turned back to the forward viewport, her eyes narrowing on the sprawling surface of the planet below. The planet's atmosphere was shrouded in clouds, dark and swirling like an endless storm. No signs of life or infrastructure were visible, only a barren landscape interrupted by deep ravines and jagged peaks. It was as if the world had been abandoned for eons, forgotten and left to decay. The ship's engines hummed softly as they entered the planet's orbit. Holt's pulse quickened as she felt the pull of the unknown. A single thought burned in her mind: what are we walking into? "Captain, we are entering the planet's atmosphere," Rail reported. "There are fluctuations in the gravitational field. It is possible the planet's core is unstable. This could be dangerous for a landing." "I know," Holt replied, her voice firm. "But we don't have time for detours. Prepare the landing craft. We're going in." The crew worked swiftly, readying the landing shuttle and preparing their gear for the descent. The airlock doors hissed open, and Holt led her team, Keary's, Lieutenant Mendez and the ship's chief engineer, Dr. Ava Fields, toward the shuttle. The tension was palpable, the weight of their mission pressing down on them. This was uncharted territory and their survival was far from guaranteed. The shuttle rocked as it pierced through the thick atmosphere, the planet's electromagnetic fields fighting against their descent. Holt's grip tightened on the control panel as they plunged toward the surface. For a brief moment the air grew still, and the outside view turned into a swirling mess of storm clouds and flashes of lightning. But then, as suddenly as it had started, the shuttle broke through the clouds. A vast, craggy landscape stretched out before them, barren but hauntingly beautiful. In the distance, a colossal structure jutted out from the mountainside, a spire of dark metal that glimmered with an eerie light. It was unmistakable. The beacon was here. "Rail, confirm that's the beacon," Holt demanded, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Yes, Captain," Rail responded. "It matches the signature found in the data. The energy readings are off the charts. Be careful, Captain. We are not alone here." The shuttle landed with a soft thud, its landing gear absorbing the impact. The hatch hissed open, and the crew stepped out into the dense, toxic atmosphere. The air was thick with the scent of something ancient, like dust and forgotten memories. A heavy silence enveloped them, broken only by the sound of their own breath. "Stay sharp," Holt ordered. "Move out." The team set off toward the towering spire in the distance, their boots crunching against the uneven terrain. As they moved, Holt couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The storm clouds above had parted just enough to cast an eerie glow on the ruins ahead, and the air seemed charged with energy. Suddenly Mendez, who was leading the way, stopped in his tracks. "Captain, you need to see this." Holt hurried forward, her heart skipping a beat as she saw what had caught his attention. The ground ahead was cracked, and beneath it ancient symbols were etched into the earth, symbols that seemed to shimmer with an otherworldly glow. It was clear that the Elders had once walked this planet, and their power still lingered in the very soil. Before anyone could speak, the ground trembled and a deep rumble echoed through the air. A low, mechanical sound began to hum from the spire, growing louder with every passing second. Holt's instincts screamed that they weren't alone, but the only thing she could see was the towering structure ahead. "Move," Holt commanded, her voice taut with urgency. We need to get inside before whatever that is catches up with us. The crew sprinted forward, adrenaline pumping as the ground beneath them shook. But just as they reached the spire's entrance, the doors creaked open on their own, revealing the darkness beyond. "Let's go," Holt said, leading the way into the unknown, where the fate of the human race, and the power of the beacon, awaited. As the doors slammed shut behind them, the hum of the ancient machine grew louder, signaling that something far more dangerous was awakening beneath their feet. The door to the spire creaked closed behind them with an unsettling clang. The moment the entrance sealed, a thick silence descended upon the crew. The hum that had echoed from the depths of the structure was now gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. Holt's breath was shallow, her senses on high alert as the darkness around them seemed to swallow the very light of their surroundings. Rail's voice broke the quiet, soft and yet urgent in Holt's mind. "Captain, I'm unable to detect any conventional power sources. This place, it's unlike anything I've encountered. The architecture doesn't match anything known to the Alliance or the Anroth." "Stay focused," Holt replied, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. She knew that whatever lay ahead was no accident. This was a carefully constructed place, one that had been untouched for eons. The elders had built something here, something powerful, and humanity was about to awaken it. Lieutenant Mendez stepped forward, his rifle raised, eyes scanning the shadows. "Captain, I'm seeing faint patterns on the walls. They look like glyphs." The faint blue glow of the symbols painted across the walls seemed to pulse, flickering as though reacting to their presence. Holt stepped closer, running a gloved hand across the intricate markings. They seemed alive, almost sentient in their design. Some of the symbols resembled ancient Terran scripts, while others were completely foreign, alien even to the most experienced xenographers. Dr. Ava Fields, the ship's chief engineer, leaned in, her curiosity piqued. "These could be instructions or even warnings. But they're too complex. I'll need time to decode them." "We don't have time," Holt said, her voice resolute. She gestured for them to move forward. "We need to reach the core now." As they continued deeper into the spire, the air grew colder, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees. A low, humming sound began to vibrate through the walls, a resonance that felt as if it were coming from deep beneath their feet. "Rail," Holt said, tension in her voice, "can you identify that sound?" "It appears to be emanating from the heart of the structure, Captain," Rail replied. "It is not mechanical. It is biological. I cannot identify its exact source, but the frequency is fluctuating. This is not a normal installation." Fields pulled out a small device from her utility belt, pointing it toward the walls. "It's possible the beacon is somehow integrated into the planet itself. We're standing in the middle of an ancient, living machine." "Great," Kiri's muttered under his breath. "So it's not just some ruin, we're in the guts of a giant weapon." Before anyone could respond, the ground trembled again, this time with much more force. The walls around them began to shift and large, jagged doors slid open in sync, leading them into a grand hall. The sheer scale of the space was breathtaking, but as the crew ventured inside, they saw something far more alarming. At the center of the hall was a massive structure, tall, almost impossibly so, with a core that pulsed with a brilliant, golden light. Was the beacon. But it was no simple artifact. It appeared alive, an organic fusion of metal and glowing energy, humming with an otherworldly force. The crew halted in their tracks, staring in awe at the beacon's presence. Its golden core rippled, radiating an energy that seemed to bend light around it. Holt's heart raced. This was what they had come for, the key to humanity's survival. But now, standing before it, she realized the magnitude of their task was far greater than she could have imagined. "We have to activate it," Holt said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "Whatever this thing is, it's the only chance we have to defeat the Anroth." Mendez took a step closer, but Dr. Fields raised her hand, signaling for caution. "Captain, I need to analyze the core structure first. I don't know what will happen if we activate it without understanding how it works." "We could." Before she could finish her sentence, the walls around them began to shimmer. The humming noise grew louder, and a wave of energy radiated from the beacon, hitting the crew like a shockwave. Holt stumbled but regained her balance, her eyes locked on the golden core. The symbols on the walls around them seemed to pulse in time with the beacon's energy, and the air grew thick with tension. "Captain, we're not alone," Kiri said, his hand going to his weapon. "Something's coming." The glow from the beacon intensified, casting long, twisting shadows across the room. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the room went silent again. The pulsing light dimmed, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. From the darkness at the far end of the hall, a figure emerged. A tall, humanoid being, its features cloaked in shadow, stepped forward. It wore a flowing cloak of deep black, and its presence seemed to absorb the light around it. The figure's eyes glowed with an intense blue, and its movements were unnaturally smooth, almost fluid. "Who dares awaken the beacon?" the figure's voice boomed, resonating in their minds rather than their ears. It was ancient, filled with power, and chilling in its certainty. Holt's hand instinctively went to her sidearm, but she knew that the being before them was not one they could easily fight. It was not a machine or a soldier. It was something far older, and far more dangerous. We're humans," Holt said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "We've come for the beacon. To save our people." The figure's glowing eyes seemed to narrow. "The beacon was never meant for your kind. It was a gift, no, a curse, left for those who could understand it. You are not ready to wield its power." "Then help us understand it," Holt pressed, her eyes never leaving the figure. "Our galaxy is dying. The Anroth are destroying everything. You don't want that, do you?" The figure studied her for a long moment, its gaze piercing through her. Then, with a slow, deliberate motion, it raised a hand and the space around them shifted. The walls of the hall seemed to pulse again, and a holographic image appeared before them. An ancient city, sprawling and magnificent, with towering structures that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The image shifted, and they saw what had been done to this civilization. A terrible, catastrophic war that had burned the planet, left only ruins in its wake. "The Anroth are not the true threat," the figure intoned. "You are. Your kind's hubris will be your undoing. But perhaps there is still a way to stop what is coming. If you are willing to pay the price." Holt's heart skipped a beat. "What price?" The figure's eyes glowed brighter, and the temperature in the room dropped. "The beacon does not offer salvation without sacrifice. What will you give to save your people, Captain Holt?" As the figure's voice echoed in her mind, Holt realized that humanity's fate was not just in their hands. It was in their willingness to face the darkest parts of their own soul. And whatever decision she made here, there would be no turning back. Holt's breath caught in her chest as the figure's eyes locked onto hers, its gaze penetrating and heavy with ancient knowledge. Every word it spoke resonated within her, sending ripples of doubt through her resolve. The beacon, the source of unimaginable power, had not been created for humanity, but it was their only hope. The choice ahead of them was not one she had been prepared for, and yet, it had arrived with a crushing inevitability. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Holt could feel the weight of her crew's gaze on her as they waited for her response. The figure's presence was overwhelming, and the unknown power of the beacon was both tantalizing and terrifying. "What price?" Holt asked again, her voice calm but laced with a rising tension. Her mind raced through countless scenarios, each one darker than the last. She knew this was a crossroads, a moment that would define humanity's future. If they took the beacon's power, could they control it? Or would it consume them? The figure's lips, barely visible beneath the hood, curled into a smile that sent a chill through Holt's spine. "The beacon was not built by your kind. It was forged in the fires of a dying race, one that sought to transcend their own limitations. Their ambition destroyed them. And now, your ambition threatens to do the same." Holt stepped forward, her jaw clenched, but she stood firm. "I know what you're saying. But if we don't stop the Anroth, everything we've built, everything we are, will be lost. We can't just let our people die." The figure's eyes flashed. "The Anroth are but a symptom, Captain Holt. The true threat is not external but internal. It is the way your kind has always sought power without understanding it. If you take the beacon, you will face your greatest enemy, yourself." Kyries, who had been silently observing, spoke up. "What does that mean? Are you saying we can't use it? Are we supposed to let the Anroth win?" The figure's gaze shifted to him, and the room seemed to darken further. "The beacon is not a weapon, Commander Kyries. It is a mirror. It will show you your deepest desires, your greatest fears. It will reflect back the truth of your nature. And in doing so, it will either elevate you or destroy you. But only if you are willing to pay the price." Field stepped forward, her scientific mind trying to make sense of it all. "So, the beacon doesn't just give us power, it challenges us?" "Exactly," the figure said. "To wield the beacon is to confront the essence of your being. The more you seek to control it, the more it will control you. It is the legacy of the elders, a lesson they failed to learn in time. Now you must decide whether you are worthy." Holt stood silently, her eyes fixed on the glowing core of the beacon. The air around it hummed with raw energy as if it were alive, waiting for her decision. She could almost feel its pull, calling to her with a seductive power. It promised salvation, but at what cost? The crew waited, breathless. The weight of their survival hung on Holt's shoulders. This was no longer just a mission to retrieve an ancient artifact. It had become a trial of character. To accept the beacon's power would be to risk everything. To reject it might mean their extinction. What is the price? Holt asked once more, her voice steely. The figure tilted its head, considering. The price is sacrifice. To gain the power of the beacon, you must give up something of equal value. Power demands a balance. You will lose what you hold most dear. And if you fail to accept that loss, the beacon will consume you, and your world along with you. Something we hold most dear? Mendez muttered. That's vague. The figure's glowing eyes bored into him. The beacon does not deal in vagueness. It speaks to the heart, not the mind. You must decide for yourselves what you are willing to part with. If you refuse, you will never leave this place. The walls seemed to close in, the air thick with an unseen pressure. Holt could feel her pulse quickening. The stakes had escalated beyond a simple war with the Anroth. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was a trial that would test everything they were as humans, everything they stood for. What happens if we refuse? Holt asked, her voice barely a whisper. The beacon will remain dormant, the figure replied. The war will continue. Your people will die. The Anroth will consume all. And you will have proven the truth of your nature, incapable of seeing beyond your own desires. The figure's words hung in the air like a death sentence. Holt clenched her fists. She could feel the weight of her crew's expectations, their trust, their hopes. They had followed her this far. They were all willing to risk everything for one chance at victory. But now the cost was personal. They weren't just risking their lives, they were risking their very souls. Captain, Curie said quietly, his voice filled with concern, you don't have to do this. We can find another way. Holt turned to him, her eyes filled with a quiet resolve. There is no other way. This is it. We either take the beacon and risk everything or we let the Anroth win. Her gaze drifted back to the beacon's pulsating core. She had to choose. And she had to choose quickly. The figure's voice echoed in her mind once again, a final warning. Choose wisely, Captain Holt. For once the beacon is activated, there is no turning back. You will either rise to your true potential, or you will fall. The choice is yours. The chamber was still, the only sound the deep hum of the beacon. Holt felt the weight of the universe pressing down on her. She could almost hear the cries of her people, her family, her friends, her soldiers, screaming for her to make the right decision. The lives of billions hung in the balance. Taking a deep breath, Holt stepped forward, her decision clear. She reached out, her hand trembling as she neared the beacon's glowing core. The figure stood motionless, watching her closely. I choose to save them, Holt said, her voice filled with determination. I choose to save humanity. The room seemed to breathe with her. The energy in the air crackled. The moment she touched the beacon, a surge of raw power flooded her body, searing through her veins. She gasped as the force of it overwhelmed her senses, and the light around them exploded into a blinding brilliance. The figure's voice was the last thing she heard before the light consumed her. Then prepare to face the cost. And the universe itself seemed to tremble. The blinding light engulfed Holt's vision, a scorching, blinding force that seemed to tear through the fabric of reality itself. She gasped, her body trembling as the power of the beacon surged through her. Her breath caught in her throat as the sensation of energy, pure and overwhelming, seemed to consume her from the inside out. For a moment, time itself seemed to stretch and warp. The room, the spire, the figure, all dissolved into nothingness. It was as if she was standing in a void, suspended between worlds. The power within her was like a raging storm, and yet, in the chaos, she felt something else. A presence, a deep, ancient force that watched and waited. This is the cost, she realized. This is the price of salvation. Suddenly, a voice broke through the haze, the voice of the figure, but it was different now, less cryptic, more direct, almost like it was within her mind. Your choice has been made, Captain Holt. The beacon's power is yours, but it is not without consequence. You have activated the core, and now it will reflect your deepest truths. You must face what lies within you. Her knees buckled beneath her as she collapsed to the floor, the raw power overwhelming her senses. Her heart raced, each beat echoing in her ears. Sweat trickled down her face as she fought to stay conscious. And then, as suddenly as the light had blinded her, the world around her shifted. She was no longer in the spire. She stood in a vast, desolate landscape. The sky above was a dark, swirling storm, lightning crackling in the distance. The ground beneath her feet was cracked and scorched, stretching endlessly in every direction. In the far distance she could see a silhouette, a figure, standing motionless against the chaos. It was her. A mirror image of Holt, but this version was different. Her eyes were cold, filled with a ruthless, calculating intent. The air between them seemed to vibrate with an unnatural tension, like the very fabric of reality was holding its breath. "This is what you could become," the figure spoke, its voice her own but twisted, darker. "The beacon does not grant you power without testing your resolve. You want to save humanity, but you also crave domination. You desire to lead, to control, to be the one who decides the fate of millions. Do you understand now, Captain?" Holt's heart pounded in her chest as she faced herself, as she recognized the truth in the figure's words. She had always been driven by the need to protect, to save her people. But somewhere along the way that desire had become tainted. Power was seductive and she had always yearned for it, control over the chaos, control over her destiny. I never wanted to be like this," Holt whispered, her voice strained. "I only wanted to save them." The dark version of herself laughed, the sound chilling. "But it's not enough to simply want to save them, is it? You are willing to sacrifice everything, even your soul, to do it. You think you can wield the beacon without paying the price, but you cannot escape the truth of who you are. The beacon will show you this, again and again." The ground beneath them cracked, and the dark version of Holt began to walk toward her. As it moved, the world around them seemed to warp and shift. For every step it took, the landscape grew darker, more chaotic, as if the very fabric of existence was crumbling. "No," Holt said, her voice stronger now. "I won't let you win. I don't need to control everything. I just need to protect them. That's all I ever wanted." The figure stopped in its tracks, its gaze unreadable. "You think that is all you want? But deep down you know the truth. The beacon is a reflection of your soul, Captain Holt. It will show you your greatest fears and your greatest desires. And it will force you to confront them." Suddenly the ground cracked open beneath her feet, sending her plummeting into a deep abyss. She screamed, but no sound escaped her mouth. The fall was endless, and the deeper she went, the more she felt her own inner darkness pulling at her, threatening to swallow her whole. But then, as she was about to lose herself completely, a light appeared, a soft, flickering glow. At first it seemed too faint to be real, but then it grew brighter, more tangible. Holt reached toward it, her hand stretching out, desperate to cling to something, anything. "I'm not my darkness. I'm not the person I fear I could become." With every ounce of strength she grasped the light. And as she did, the darkness around her began to recede. The fall stopped and she felt herself being lifted upward, pulled back into the light. The darkness, the storm, and the terrible version of herself faded away, leaving her standing once more in the chamber of the beacon. Her body trembled, the energy still coursing through her veins, but now it was different. The oppressive weight of the beacon's power was still there, but it no longer consumed her. She had faced her fears, confronted the darkness within, and emerged stronger for it. "Captain Holt," the figure said, its voice now softer, almost approving. "You have chosen. You have faced yourself and walked through the trials of the beacon. You are not perfect, but you are ready." The room around her began to shift once more. The power that had surged through her began to stabilize, becoming a part of her rather than an overwhelming force. "You have the power to save your people, Captain," the figure continued. "But you must remember, power comes with sacrifice. You have taken the first step. Now you must continue and know that the cost will follow you." Holt nodded, her resolve now clearer than ever. She had accepted the power of the beacon, but she would not let it define her. She had faced her darkness and chosen to rise above it. The journey ahead would be difficult, but she was ready to face whatever came next. As the figure faded into the shadows, the beacon's golden core dimmed, its energy now pulsing gently like a heartbeat. "Captain," Kyrie's voice crackled over the comms, breaking the silence. "Are you all right?" We felt a massive surge of energy. "What happened?" Holt took a deep breath, steadying herself before answering. "I faced it. I've made my choice. The beacon is ours. Now let's finish this." And with that, Holt turned toward her crew, ready to lead them into the heart of the storm, knowing that the price of victory had already been paid. The battle was far from over, but humanity had a chance. And that, she realized, was worth everything. Holt felt the weight of her decision settle in her chest, heavy but resolute. The power of the beacon now flowed through her like an unrelenting river, familiar and foreign all at once. It wasn't just a gift nor merely a weapon. It was something deeper, more intimate, a force that connected her to the pulse of the galaxy itself. But with that power came an unbearable responsibility. The choice she had made and the price she had paid would echo across the stars for centuries to come. As the chamber around her began to stabilize, the rest of her crew slowly approached. The once ominous hum of the beacon was now a steady, almost peaceful sound, as if it had accepted her as its new conduit. Dr. Fields was the first to speak, her voice laced with curiosity tempered by concern. "Captain, we felt it," she said, her eyes searching Holt's face for signs of what had happened. "The power surge, it was like a wave of pure energy. What did you see? What did it do to you?" Holt glanced at the glowing core of the beacon, its radiant light now muted, almost calm. She took a deep breath, willing herself to stay grounded. "I saw myself," Holt replied softly, her voice steady but distant. "Not just the person I am, but the person I could become, if I let the power of the beacon consume me. It showed me my deepest desires, my fears. I had to face it or I wouldn't have been able to wield it. But I've made my choice. We're ready to use it." Fields exchanged a glance with Mendez, who stood by, silent but watchful. Holt could see the unspoken questions in their eyes, the worry that lingered like a storm cloud over their heads. They had all seen the beacon's power manifest in different ways, and each of them had their own doubts. But there was no time for hesitation. The Anroth were already marching across the galaxy. The fight for humanity's future was unfolding, and they had one chance to win. "We're still on schedule, Captain," Rail reported, his voice cutting through the tension in the room. "The Anroth fleet is advancing at full speed. We don't have much time before they reach the heart of the Alliance. The coordinates you obtained from the beacon's core suggest the weapon is ready. But we have no way of knowing exactly how it will work." Holt turned to face her crew, her eyes steely with determination. "We don't need to know everything. We only need to know that it works. We've got one shot at this and we're taking it." The urgency in her voice was enough to steel the nerves of her crew. Mendez nodded, his face grim but resolute. "Understood, Captain. We'll follow your lead." She gave a final glance at the beacon before turning toward the exit. The chamber's walls slowly closed behind her, as if the spire itself were breathing in sync with her every movement. The long corridor back to the ship was shrouded in silence, each step echoing like a countdown. On board the Vanguard, the crew worked in synchronized harmony. Rail was already at his station, coordinating with the fleet, while Fields and Mendez oversaw the integration of the beacon's energy into the ship's systems. Holt stood in the command center, watching the holographic displays of the Anroth fleet advancing toward the Alliance's core worlds. "ETA is 2 hours, Rail confirmed. "They've already wiped out most of the outer defenses. The Alliance is scrambling, but they'll be too late to mount any meaningful resistance." Holt's jaw tightened. She knew this was the pivotal moment. The Alliance's forces were too scattered, too fractured to stop the Anroth. But the beacon, its power, could shift the balance. If she could unlock its potential, they might stand a chance. Dr. Fields approached her, a worried frown crossing her face. "Captain, I've integrated the beacon's energy into our systems, but we're still flying blind. There's no manual for this kind of technology. The power is unstable, and if we push too hard..." Holt placed a hand on her shoulder, her voice calm but firm. "We don't have a choice, Ava. We've come too far to turn back now. We'll figure it out as we go." Fields hesitated but nodded, her trust in Holt clear despite her fears. The entire crew had risked everything for this moment. There was no more room for second-guessing. As the Vanguard broke through the atmosphere of the unknown planet, the vastness of the Anroth fleet loomed in the distance, a dark cloud of destruction descending upon their home. They were the last line of defense. Holt inhaled deeply, the weight of the decision pressing down on her once more. "Whatever happens next, this is it. Deploy the weapon," she ordered, her voice unyielding. For a brief, horrifying moment, there was silence. The crew held their breath as the ship's systems began to hum and crackle, the energy from the beacon coursing through every conduit. The entire Vanguard seemed to vibrate with a strange energy, alive, almost sentient. Fields worked rapidly at the console, her fingers flying over the controls. "I'm initiating the sequence now, Captain. Stand by." The lights aboard the ship flickered. The hum from the beacon surged, louder and more intense, as though it were drawing power from the very stars themselves. Holt felt a sharp pain in her head, a brief flash of memory, of the dark reflection of herself from the beacon's trial, and then it was gone. Rail's voice came through, tense and alert. "Captain, the Anroth fleet is locking onto us. We've been targeted. They're firing. Hold steady." Holt commanded, her hands gripping the edge of the console. "Ava, Can we trigger the weapon before they strike? Fields was silent for a long moment, her face pale, then she nodded. I've got it. It's ready. But once I fire this, there's no going back. Holt stood tall, her gaze fixed on the vast, enemy fleet approaching. Do it. A pulse of energy, bright and devastating, exploded from the vanguard. The weapon, the beacon's power, was unleashed in a blinding arc of pure destruction. The light illuminated the space around them, the air crackling with the intensity of the energy. Then, nothing. The seconds stretched into eternity as Holt and her crew stared at the screens. For a brief, impossible moment, there was no sign of the Anroth fleet. And then the stars themselves seemed to shudder as the Anroth ships began to disintegrate one by one. It was as though the very fabric of their vessels was being torn apart by a force far beyond their comprehension. But it wasn't over. The weapon had only bought them time. We've disrupted their fleet, Rail said, his voice barely audible. But they're reforming, faster than we can track. Holt exhaled, realizing they had only delayed the inevitable. The Anroth were still coming. This is just the beginning, Holt muttered, her gaze set on the horizon. The fight for humanity's future wasn't over. Not yet. But now they had a weapon unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. The beacon had given them a chance, but at what cost? Only time would reveal whether humanity could survive the storm they had unleashed. The vanguard rocked as the shockwaves of the Anroth fleet's retaliation shook the very structure of the ship. Holt's knuckles were white as she gripped the console, her eyes focused on the tactical readouts flashing before her. The massive fleet had begun to reform after the devastating burst of energy from the beacon, and now they were charging toward them with renewed fury. The destruction had been catastrophic, but it had not been enough. We've bought ourselves some time, Rail's voice broke through the chaos, but they're coming at us fast, Captain. We're outgunned and outnumbered. We can't hold off another wave like that. The seconds felt like hours as Holt's mind raced. The Anroth were relentless, and they weren't going to stop until humanity was eradicated. Even with the power of the beacon at their disposal, Holt knew they couldn't simply rely on it to win the war. The stakes were too high, the cost too great. How much longer until their fleet is within range? Holt demanded, her voice cutting through the tension. 10 minutes, Rail answered. They're closing fast, Captain. They'll be in firing range soon, and we won't survive another hit like the last one. Holt turned to Fields, who was still at the console, her face pale but determined. Ava, I need you to modify the beacon's power output. We have one chance to turn the tide. Can we make it stronger? Fields hesitated. I can try, Captain. But we don't know the limits of the beacon. If I increase the power too much, it could destabilize. It could destroy us all. Holt's eyes locked onto hers, the weight of the decision pressing down. We don't have the luxury of playing it safe anymore, Ava. The Anroth won't stop until we're all dead. You have to do it. Fields nodded reluctantly, her fingers already flying over the controls. I'll reconfigure the system to draw more energy. But I can't guarantee the outcome. This will push the beacon's capacity beyond anything we've done before. Do it, Holt said. Now. The crew scrambled to prepare for the final confrontation. Holt stood at the helm, her mind clear despite the chaos. She could feel the pulse of the beacon thrumming beneath the vanguard, its raw energy flooding the ship's systems, making everything around her hum with the intensity of untapped power. Captain, we've lost communication with the Alliance, Mendez reported, his voice tinged with frustration. The Anroth are jamming our transmissions. We're on our own. Not entirely, Holt replied, turning to him. We still have each other. And we still have the beacon. Her words were resolute, but doubt gnawed at her. Could this truly be the answer? The beacon had granted them extraordinary power, but at what cost? Was it worth the risk? She caught a glimpse of herself in the reflection of the viewport, a captain who had led her crew through impossible odds, yet stood on the edge of something far more dangerous than any battle they had ever fought. Could she control this power without losing herself to it? Ready for deployment, Captain, Rail's voice snapped her out of her thoughts. She turned toward him, giving a sharp nod. Let's make this count. The Anroth fleet, massive and imposing, was now in full view. Their ships seemed to stretch across the galaxy like a plague, each one a dark harbinger of death. They were a force unlike any humanity had ever faced, but Holt refused to flinch. She couldn't afford to hesitate. Not now. Not ever again. Firing sequence in progress, Fields announced, her voice strained as the ship's systems were pushed to their breaking point. The beacon's power flared, its energy now a blinding force that lit up the entire command deck. Holt could feel it surging within her, wrapping around her consciousness, as if the beacon were reaching into the very core of her being. Fire! Holt shouted, her voice strong, her hand slamming down onto the console. The energy surged forward in a torrent of light, a beam of pure, unbridled force that shot across the space between the Vanguard and the Anroth fleet. It collided with the lead ship, and for a split second, everything seemed to freeze. Time hung in the balance. The Anroth fleet's massive vessel shimmered, its hull buckling under the intensity of the beam. Then, with a deafening explosion, the ship disintegrated into 1,000 pieces, its remnants scattering into the vast emptiness of space. The explosion was followed by a chain reaction that rippled through the Anroth ranks, ships imploding one after another in a cascade of destruction. The beacon's power was unlike anything they had ever imagined. It tore through the Anroth fleet like a hot knife through butter, erasing their presence from the universe with a fury that left Holt momentarily breathless. But as the fleet disintegrated before her eyes, Holt felt a shiver of dread. The cost. The price of wielding such power was always more than anyone could fathom. "We've done it," Rail said, his voice filled with awe, though there was an edge of disbelief. "The Anroth are breaking apart. We've won." Holt stared at the aftermath of the battle, the destruction of an entire fleet, and yet, something gnawed at her. It wasn't over. There were still survivors. The Anroth were relentless, and she knew they would return, smarter, more dangerous. This victory, as monumental as it was, would not last. But for the moment Holt allowed herself to breathe. They had won. "Captain," Mendes said, his voice tight, "the beacon, its energy, it's starting to destabilize. We're losing control." Holt's heart skipped a beat. The beacon, for all its power, was not a weapon that could be used lightly. They had pushed it too far, and now its energy was beginning to spiral out of control. "We need to shut it down," Holt said, her voice firm. "Now." Fields scrambled at her console, but the readings were beyond anything they had prepared for. I can't disengage it, Captain. The systems are failing." The ship's lights flickered, and a low hum vibrated through the Vanguard, the energy from the beacon surging dangerously. "No," Holt said through gritted teeth. "We've come too far. We cannot let it destroy us now." Rail's voice rang out urgently. "Captain, if we don't find a way to stabilize the beacon, it'll tear the Vanguard apart. We have to." A violent tremor ran through the ship, and the energy levels surged, making the Vanguard shake violently. Holt felt a sharp pain shoot through her head, a wave of nausea sweeping over her. She was connected to the beacon. It was part of her now. And if it was to die, so might she. "Brace yourselves," Holt shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We'll figure this out together." In that moment, as the power of the beacon reached its zenith, Holt realized one undeniable truth. The fight for humanity's future wasn't over. It had only just begun. And the storm was far from finished. The Vanguard was shuddering, the hum of the beacon more frantic now, vibrating through the walls and the very air. Holt could feel its pulse in her chest, a pounding rhythm that mirrored the rapid beat of her heart. The power was beyond anything they had anticipated, and the cost was becoming all too real. The ship's systems were in chaos, flickering and failing. The crew moved in a flurry of desperate action, trying to contain the growing energy from the beacon, but it was slipping from their grasp. "Ava, how much time do we have?" Holt asked, her voice cutting through the cacophony of alarms. Field's hands were trembling as she tried to stabilize the system, but her face was pale, eyes wide with fear. "Minutes, maybe less. The beacon's core is becoming unstable. If we don't shut it down, it'll destroy us all. Captain, we can't control it anymore. It's too far gone." Holt's mind raced. The victory over the Anroth fleet had come at a price, but now the true price was staring them in the face. The power of the beacon, once the key to humanity's salvation, had turned into a weapon that threatened to consume them. They had no plan for this, no way to reverse the damage they had done by pushing the beacon to its limits. She turned toward the viewport, watching the stars stretch out into infinity. In the distance, the wreckage of the Anroth fleet was slowly drifting apart. They had won. But was it worth it? Holt's stomach twisted with the gnawing fear that the price of victory would be her life, and the lives of everyone aboard the Vanguard. But then she remembered the vision she had seen in the beacon's trial, the dark reflection of herself, power-hungry, consumed by control. She had faced that darkness and had chosen a different path. She wasn't going to let the beacon define her. Not like this. "Captain," Mendes said urgently, his voice cracking through her thoughts. "The energy output is going critical. We need to make a choice. Either we stabilize the beacon and risk it consuming us, or we disconnect it completely and destroy the Vanguard in the process. Holt's heart clenched. They had come so far, sacrificed so much. But if they didn't act quickly, it would all be for nothing. She had to make a choice. She had to stop the beacon before it tore them apart, and that meant one thing. "We disconnect it," she said, her voice firm. "Do it now." "Captain, no." Fields protested, her voice filled with desperation. "If we disconnect it, we'll lose everything, the ship, the crew, the power. We won't survive." "I know," Holt said, turning to face her crew, her expression resolute. "But if we don't disconnect it now, the beacon will destroy everything we've fought for. We've won the battle, but if we let this power consume us, it'll be the end of humanity. We can't let that happen." The room fell silent, each crew member processing the weight of her words. Holt could feel the tension in the air, the knowledge that they were about to make a sacrifice unlike any before. She was asking them to give up everything, their ship, their mission, their lives. But it was the only way. "Ava," Holt said, her voice softer now. "Can you do it?" Fields swallowed hard, then nodded. "I'll initiate the process, Captain. But once we do this, there's no turning back." She gave a final nod. "Do it." Fields didn't hesitate. With a flurry of rapid commands, she accessed the beacon's core, sending a series of emergency shutdown protocols to every system. The ship groaned, a deep, unnatural sound that reverberated throughout the hull. The power surged, then flickered, and for a moment, it seemed as if the Vanguard was on the verge of collapsing under the weight of the energy. Holt braced herself, her hand gripping the edge of the console, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She could feel the beacon's energy trying to fight back, like a trapped animal desperate to escape. And then, with a final, devastating tremor, the core of the beacon went dark. Silence. The alarms went quiet. The lights aboard the ship flickered, then stabilized. The rumbling stopped. Holt slowly let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They had done it. The beacon was shut down. But the cost was immediate. The Vanguard was adrift in space, its systems crippled by the shutdown. The engines were offline. The communication systems were down. They were stranded in the cold vastness of the galaxy, with no way to contact the Alliance, no way to return home. Holt stood motionless, staring at the viewports, her mind racing. They had defeated the Anroth, but at what cost? They were alone. Helpless. "I'm sorry, Captain," Field said quietly, her voice tinged with guilt. "I couldn't stabilize it. I couldn't." "You did everything you could, Ava," Holt interrupted, her voice firm but understanding. She stepped toward the young scientist, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You saved us all. We made the right choice." Fields nodded, tears welling in her eyes. Holt understood. It wasn't just the ship that had been saved. It was their humanity. The beacon had been a tool, a weapon of unimaginable power, and they had decided, together, that it was too dangerous to wield. No one person, no one race should ever have that kind of control over the galaxy. Not even to save themselves. Holt turned to face her crew, meeting each of their eyes, one by one. "We're alive. And that's something to be grateful for. We've given humanity a fighting chance. We've stopped the Anroth. And we'll find a way home. Together." The crew nodded, their resolve hardening. They had lost the Vanguard, but they had not lost each other. And more importantly, they hadn't lost the future. As Holt took her place at the now quiet helm, she could feel a faint sense of peace. The storm wasn't over. The universe was still a vast, dangerous place. The Anroth may be defeated, but new challenges would rise in their wake. The fight for survival was far from finished. But as long as they had each other, and the strength to face whatever came next, humanity's spirit would endure. "Captain," Rail said, his voice steady, "we'll survive this. We'll make it home. Together." Holt smiled, the weight of the moment lifting just enough for her to feel hope. "Together," she repeated. And with that, they set their course into the unknown. The storm was over, for now. But the journey ahead would define them all.